Teachers, what was the worst thing a substitute teacher did while you were gone? Story 1. I had to go out for surgery early 2019. I arranged for my predecessor, who I worked with for a long time in a different classroom, to take over for 6 weeks. I wrote meticulous lesson plans, with song lists and everything, and we had several meetings beforehand. First week, my daughter, I teach in a small district, I teach both of my kids, comes home and is singing freaking Baby Beluga in the shower, my sub's favorite song to teach, a song not anywhere on my list. Apparently, my entire lesson was scrapped, and she spent the whole class teaching this song. So the worst thing that a friend of mine did was to teach my kid a song she tortured me with for weeks. I found out later she didn't follow any of my lesson plans, which is a pretty common thing no matter what one teaches. Yes, she is still my friend though, but no, I do not request her as a sub anymore. Oh, between Baby Beluga and Baby Shark, I don't know which one is worse. But I curse this story just for getting that song stuck back in my head again after years of peace and quiet. Oh man, I've got a baby on the way and I think this is going to be my life for the foreseeable future. Wish me luck, everybody. Story 2. I came back after being gone 1 day, and my students told me the substitute teacher flipped over tables in a rage and was escorted from the building by a cop. What actually happened is that the sub left the room to take a 20-minute phone call, and the kids thought it would be funny to flip the tables over. The substitute then had to flip the tables right side up while yelling at the kids. Then, during lunch, my special ed assistant co-teacher came into my room to set up and caught the sub making out with a student. Turns out she was 18 to his 25, and the 20-minute phone call was to set up the lunch meeting. The principal then had him escorted from the building by the resource officer. This is why I say having a sub is more work than just coming into school yourself. I totally get that. Sometimes it's actually harder to delegate your tasks than to just do them yourself. I can only imagine that for teaching, it's so much harder because it's got to follow such a strict curriculum regimen, and you have to plan out the day by the hour or by the minute even. I give teachers so much credit. They are so underpaid for what they do. Story 3. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, my reading group read Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. Our reading teacher knew she was going to be absent, so she arranged for us to watch The Secret of Nim. We watched it over 2 days, and the substitute talked through the entire movie. She continuously compared the book to the movies, or talked about what would have been better done, but never stopped the movie, and ruined it for us, and there were only maybe 8 of us. Then at the end of the 2nd day, gave us a homework worksheet to fill in about the book versus movie. Most of us did poorly because we missed things due to the sub's near constant talking. If it wasn't for the fact that most of us did so badly and complained about the sub, I don't know that our reading teacher would have believed us. I can already tell that this sub is the kind of person to watch a horror movie in a public theater and say things like, "Don't go in there." Story 4. I'm not a teacher, but our substitute teacher gave us a task to write a story about any theme we liked. 4th grade, age 10 to 11. At the moment, I was hooked on everything space-related, the planets, the moon landing, etc. Too young to understand even remotely any of that, but this didn't hinder me from writing a story about Apollo 11. I put my back into it and talked my father into typing it on the computer, since it would have taken 3 days for that one page. Filled with pride, I gave the story to the substitute teacher, and I got it handed back with a line across the paper stating that I didn't write that. No questions or anything, just a, "You didn't do this, I know that." Any form of trying to convince her failed, albeit that no adult person would write even remotely amateurish like I did. Story 5. Not a teacher, but I had a substitute teacher once who, at the end of our gym class, forced the boys, only the boys, to stay. When we asked her why, she said it's because some guys outside complained that someone was yelling and swearing at them, and that she knows it was a boy because it was a male voice. Girls can't talk in deep voices. No one fessed up and no one tattled on the person who did it, so 20 minutes into the next period, the sub said she'd get us all suspended for a month and finally let us leave. The guy who did it eventually confessed to the principal, depriving us all of our 30-day vacation. Mustard. Edit. My next period was history, and I was pretty tight with the teacher, so he excused me and the guys who came with me for being late. Yes, I definitely disagree with this person who said that men cannot sound like women and vice versa. I mean, you guys have heard my Karen impression, right? It's flawless. Excuse me, I need to speak to your manager, please. Story 6. Not a teacher, but in the 4th grade, our teacher had a baby and was gone for several weeks. The sub we had was an absolute witch. She had no patience for kids. She'd yell at us for stupid stuff, ask us questions, or give us homework that was way above our tiny 4th grade brain levels, and then complain and call us stupid when literally none of the kids did well on the work. One girl decided to get smart with her one day, and she walks over and slaps the girl hard across the face, which of course sends the girl into a hysterical sobbing fit, and says, "That's what your horse of a mother should be doing more often." Being tiny, adorable 4th graders, we were all too afraid to tell anyone. We had to deal with that for 3 weeks, until the main teacher came back. Story 7. 2 things come to mind. Number 1, tell the black children they need to speak more clearly because people think black people are hard to understand. Number 2, just sit and play on the phone while class loses its mind. Casual racism coming from teachers is just the worst. I learned what the N-word was because my white music teacher taught my entirely white 3rd grade class an old, quote, historical German-American song that had the N-word in it. She censored the word in the sheet music and had us just hum at that point in the song, but I had a friend who knew and told me about it. There's no reason to be teaching grade school kids a song with that word, and especially not without any context about why the word is bad. Story 8. A substitute teacher in my high school French class showed a movie that was straight up softcore pornography, but tried to explain that since it was in French, it was artistic. It was equally frustrating because while I wanted to see boobies, I also couldn't stop reading the subtitles because I had to understand what they were saying. The teacher did not come back the next day. Update, I went through all the comments and looked at everyone who suggested what movie it might be, and none of those movies were the ones shown. This would have been in 2006, and the movie looked maybe late 90s or early 2000s. If I come across it, I will update this thread, but for all I know, it could have been a corno in French. I think he's actually referring to a TV series called Télé Français. The pineapple in that show never wears pants. Story 9. Number 1. Asked a deaf kid to take off his hearing aids. Kids tried to tell her he needs them, but to her they looked like headphones. She cried when she was confronted by another teacher. Number 2, when I was in 6th grade, I fractured my wrist, but it was my dominant hand, so I had to write poorly with my right hand. Teacher forced me to write with my left while I had a cast. I couldn't even grasp the pencil. I cried a lot. Then a couple months go by and I got my cast off. The sub told me to suck it up and write with my left hours after getting my cast off. I felt like jelly and intense pain. Teacher was fired at the end of 7th grade because of unnecessary complaints. Story 10. This happened to my colleague, but I was in the classroom next door. My colleague was showing Clash of the Titans at the end of the year after a unit on ancient Greece. There's mild nudity at the beginning and at the end of the movie, but they were in the middle of the movie, so there shouldn't have been an issue. He left the video paused at the right spot. We still had VCRs like 10 years ago when this happened, but the sub somehow managed to show both the nudity at the beginning and the end of the movie. The nudity scenes were hours apart, and the class was only 40 minutes. Then the sub wrote an email to the principal about how my colleague made him show nudity. Story 11. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade life science, we had a sub. For the first 5 or so minutes of class, he made us do a Kahoot. For anyone who doesn't know Kahoot, it's a learning website that lets you take a quiz in a fun way. The only problem was that he told us every answer. Next, we were supposed to be learning about parts of a microscope, but instead he got them out and told us to mess around with them, and he broke one of them. After that, he put a video up and ate my teacher's chocolate, then fell asleep for the last half hour or so of class. Needless to say, when our teacher got back and we told her about the sub, he was fired. Story 12. Lost more than half of my textbooks that I purchased myself, as well as textbooks that were school property. Administration just shrugged at this until they found out the textbooks belonging to the school were around $120 each. Also lost all the book assignments of 4 classes I asked him to collect so I could correct those at home. Kinda sucked for the students who did put a lot of work on it and didn't have digital copies. Also didn't teach anything that I asked him to because he didn't really like the subject matter. Also didn't bother grading. When I checked the grades he had given out, there was only 1 grade, and everyone was given 8 out of 10, even students that didn't take my class. Story 13. Not a teacher, but in elementary school, I had a bloody nose during class, and I asked to use the restroom. She said no and refused to let me go to the restroom. I think she didn't believe me. I sat there until the blood had spilled all over the desk, then raised my bloody hand to be excused, and only then did she allow me to go clean myself up. She even had the audacity to ask me why I didn't ask to be excused earlier, which was a complete lie, as she definitely heard me the first time, and even the other students pointed out that my nose was bleeding. When the teacher returned, she was livid about what happened. I believe she complained to the administration to make sure the sub was never hired again. Alright, you guys might not believe me about this, but I'm 30 years old and I have never had a bloody nose. I don't know how unique that actually makes me, but if animes have taught me anything, it's that bloody noses are supposed to be much more common, especially when you get aroused at the most inopportune times. Story 14. Was a student. Our math teacher went on leave for a while, I think maternity, and the supply teacher was absolutely useless. He'd been given one topic to teach us, and that was it. For weeks. We had a whole textbook to be working through, and I was gunning to take my maths GCSE a year early, but no, we just did a topic our class had got the hang of in a week for 2 or 3 months, because I guess he didn't know or bother to ask what we were supposed to be doing next. So the rest of the year, we had to go ahead of the pace we were expecting to be able to cover everything we had to know. Stupid supply teachers. Story 15. My 9th grade English teacher was fired, which is an entire other story, and the school had difficulty finding someone to fill the spot. We would have random subs, but they didn't really teach us, so eventually we had a different person babysit us each day or week. One time it was the very scary principal who just glared at us like we were convicts about to escape, the school's police officers who at least talked to us, and various teachers for one-day stints. I don't know why one of our 5 librarians couldn't have been in there going through grade-appropriate books at the least. We spent 2 or 3 months like that. Story 16. I was a teacher's assistant while in college. The teacher and I took a week-long workshop and had a sub. The worst thing she did, not letting the kids go potty. It was in kindergarten, and she said all the kids going to the bathroom were interrupting the class. One girl wet herself. School policy was if kids under a certain age had an accident, the nurse would give them a pull-up, basically a diaper, to wear. The substitute proceeded to make fun of the girl for wearing a diaper, calling her baby and such. The little girl ended up facing repercussions at home too. It was devastating to hear about. Story 17. This actually happened to the teacher in the classroom next door to me, but the sub started ranting about Democrats and talked about the Second Amendment. He took a stapler and told the students to pretend it's a gun. He then set the stapler on one of the desks and said that the gun could sit there for all eternity without hurting anyone, as long as no one pulls the trigger. I mean, maybe I could see this conversation happening in a social studies class, given the correct context, but this was in a middle school science class. Story 18. I had left out overnight eggs that I was going to use in a science experiment the following day. I was out and thought nothing about it. I returned the following day and went looking for the eggs, only to find them missing. I asked a student where they went, and I was informed that the substitute took the class to the special education kitchen, hard-boiled them, and ate them. I went to talk to my AP, my assistant principal, and was informed that the sub had called in sick for her job for that day due to food poisoning. Story 19. He yelled at one of the only girls in my high school engineering class, saying girls don't belong in engineering. He also kicked his feet up on the desk and read the paper the entire day. He banged a yardstick on a desk to get everyone's attention, then pointed it at the whiteboards with the daily objectives, all without saying a word. He disappeared at lunch and came back smelling like weed. These are all reports I got from my students the next day. This guy was a retired teacher too. Story 20. Gave out snacks I bought with my own money that I kept for kids who stayed after to get tutoring. Threw out a broken electric pencil sharpener that kids broke in front of her, which again I bought with my own money and couldn't get replaced by the company because I had no product to send back. I still don't have a sharpener for my room. Let the kids go through my things in the cabinets and my desk. Lost a bunch of stuff that way. Story 21. Interesting opposite story. My first public school teacher, 4th grade, was a complete hard butt. He didn't teach us science or social studies because he found them too fun. So our whole day was just math and grammar. We were all too young to realize this was weird, but when he got sick for a couple weeks, the substitute very poorly hid a red face when she found out and had us make volcanoes and model teepees for the whole week. Story 22. He peed in my desk chair. Swear to God. He apparently peed in my chair and the students noticed it and mentioned it to him. He ignored them and just sat there anyway with a huge puddle of urine on the floor. The kids called security on him. I came in the next day and sat in the chair. It was wet, and about that time, a security guard stuck her head in the door and said, "Don't sit there, the guy peed in your chair." Story 23. Not a teacher, but we had a sub for our science class. She didn't believe in science, but pseudosciences, was sexist to males, and because of her weird diet, would rip loud, sulfur-smelling farts all the time, then get mad if we brought it up, despite being fed new age hippie BS and being crop-dusted. She was also a horrible anatomy teacher because she said women can choose when to have periods without birth control. Story 24. High school student here. I was doing my own stuff and scratching my ear, and this guy with a heavy British accent called me over to his desk and scolded me for imitating him and being quite rude. When I tried to say that I was simply scratching my ear, he scolded me again for arguing against him and that if I said any more, I'd be sent to the principal's office. Needless to say, that day did not go well. Story 25. Didn't do anything to the kids per se, but told the kids that the reason I was out was because my mom was having breast cancer surgery. I teach K through 5, and I specifically didn't tell the kids because I didn't want them to worry. So when I came back, I had a bunch of kids come up to me asking about my mom, which was so sweet, but not something the kids should have had to worry about. Story 26. Not quite her fault. Sub got dosed with acid at lunch. It became a whole thing. Kids went ballistic. Troublemaker was actually the kid to say, "Screw this," and got the principal. She was hiding under my desk when administration came in. It was not the first time it happened in the school. Ruined coffee for me forever. I finished all the beverages before entering the building. Story 27. When I was a substitute, I got a lot of requested jobs because the substitute pool was poor. One such example given to me was a substitute who would just go to sleep. I barely believed it. Once I was teaching full-time, I had a sub come in for a day. When I got back, my students told me that he told them to leave him alone, sat down, and went to sleep. I believed it then. Story 28. We legit do not use subs at my school. There are teaching assistants from pre-K to kindergarten who will cover in a pinch, but more often than that, we just divide the kids up amongst the other teachers. Because, yes, it is easier to handle 6 or 7 extra kids for a day than to pick up the pieces after a sub has blown through town. Story 29. There was a harpsichord in the front of the classroom, used both for demonstration and performance. Not knowing what he was doing, the sub tried to tune 3 notes that had gone mildly out of tune while I was away. He managed to break the strings on all 3 notes and left a message inside reading, "Sorry about that." When I first started playing guitar, I got nervous tuning the strings because I was afraid that they would snap and hit me in the eye or something. I would get so nervous that my belly button would start sweating sometimes. Much better at it now, though, and if you'd like to see my guitar playing, go check out my personal channel, Brother Goose. Story 30. She was brought in to teach history. What did she teach? Geography. Like, how? The worksheets I left were literally on Hitler's rise to power. Edit, I should have mentioned she taught how earthquakes can cause tsunamis. Yes, it was interesting, but you had one job, and it wasn't that. Story 31. I had a cool Chinese lucky cat that went missing after I had a sub. My students said the sub seemed really intrigued by it, talked about it several times, and even moved it from the shelf where it sat and brought it over to my desk. It was gone when I returned the next day. Story 32. I was a sub at the time, now a teacher, but I heard stories of one sub who fell asleep in the ISS room, that's in-school suspension, and the kids escaped it. This sub was in a car accident and had brain trauma from it. He used to forget where he parked his car and had a bad sense of overall direction. Story 33. I had a sub give out my cell phone number to my high school students so they could call me and give me excuses as to why they weren't taking their test while I was gone. I was livid. I complained to the sub office, and that teacher never subbed for my building again. Story 34. She let the kids run wild and do whatever they wanted, first graders. I was out because my dad had passed away. Thank God my team realized what happened and all pulled together and cleaned the room and put it back together before I returned to work. Story 35. If my substitutes even showed up, they only occasionally followed the lesson plans I left, and I made sure to attach them to the online sign-up and print and leave them on my desk. It's like they looked at the lessons and said, nah. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.